In 2021, emerging from the coronavirus pandemic, two movie fans, Stephanie and Jack, were determined to perfect a podcast which would provide them with the key to eternal entertainment. They were to name it The Horrible Idea.
Ay, Dios mío, un abuelo inmortal, la idea horrible. Cuéntanos dados sobre la película.
And this is that podcast, The Horrible Idea. This is Stephanie. That immaculate Spanish was Jack. And if you'd like to...
Me llamo Yak.
If you'd like to hit us up on social media, we are at HorriblePod on Twitter and at The Horrible Idea on Instagram. Jack, what movie did we watch this week?
Guillermo del Toro's Cronos from 1994. Released March 30th, 1994, written and directed by Guillermo del Toro.
Yeah, and this is, it was a budget of $2 million, and the box office was $621,000. Not great, but I think a stat to keep in mind there is that this was only released at 2 theaters in the U.S. I think at widest release it was 28, so, not too bad. The IMDb folks give it a 6.7 out of 10. Rotten Tomato critics, 91%, and Rotten Tomato audience, 69%.
Nice.
I was waiting for that, yeah.
Yeah, this is a fun one, and one that I had not seen before. Tell us a little trivia about it, because I think there's a bunch.
Yeah, so this is Guillermo del Toro's first film. It was completely independently produced. He took out a lot of kind of personal loans and debt to get this made. So a few kind of trivia facts. I already said there was a very narrow release of this in the US, but that's, indie film for you. It won 9 Ariel Awards. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of that, but it's the Mexican version of the Oscars. Del Toro was only 29 when he made this. He had been a special effects makeup artist, and this was kind of his first foray into feature films, and he's had a very storied career since then, of course. And it's also the first time that Ron Perlman and Del Toro worked together. They went on to work together on Blade 2, Pacific Rim, and of course Hellboy 1 and 2.
Yeah.
I know you said you hadn't seen this one before. What were sort of your preconceptions or your previous Del Toro viewings, if any?
Yeah, I love his work. I really liked Hellboy 1. Hellboy 2 was fun. I love the Shape of Water. And what else? I never seen this, and I have not seen Pan's Labyrinth, which seems like a big hole in my cinematic.
I haven't either.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's one of the ones I haven't seen. I've seen this, Devil's Backbone, Shape of Water. I have not seen Pacific Rim because it just didn't look very
unfortunately
good.
Seen both of them, and neither was very good.
Yeah, I love giant things fighting, so I wanted to like it, wanted to want to see it, but it just didn't sound like it was very good. So.
And interestingly, I'm a big Blade fan, especially 1 and 3, and I have no memory of him being in 2 at all. Ron Perlman being.
Oh yeah, well it's possible that he could have had a whole bunch of makeup on or something. Also,
looking at Ron Perlman's IMDb, man, that guy does a lot of voiceover work.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah, he's for me famous. Besides his actually screen acting work, he does most of the voiceover in the Fallout series, which I'm a big fan of.
And what was your preconceptions of Guillermo?
So I had seen this before, but it's been probably 10 to 12 years. I remembered liking it. But yeah, so revisiting it, I was kind of like, oh yeah, this is a really strong feature debut, especially, as a completely independent production. And I think Del Toro's, I think his filmography is sort of mixed for a lot of people, but he is really great at like magical realism and myth making and sort of, and of course, like the production and makeup design is really fun. And I think he utilizes it in a really smart way in this film in particular.
Yeah. It was great. It's sort of like, it's funny because I'd never seen this, but his sort of aesthetic and all of his hallmarks are so present in this that, just seeing Hellboy in Shape of Water, I could like see this very clearly. So let's do a little plot breakdown. Antiques dealer Jesus Gris stumbles across the Cronos device, a 400-year-old scarab that, when latched onto his arm, grants youth and eternal life, but also a thirst for blood.
As Jesus enjoys his newfound vitality, he's unaware that a dying old man, Dieter de la Guardia, has sent his nephew, Angel, or Angel, to find the scarab and bring it back to him. But Jesus will not give immortality up easily, even risking the life of his beloved granddaughter.
It was very good. The pacing was a little... It's my first movie kind of pacing problems, like, but also it sort of had that novelty of a first movie where he does some sort of unpredictable things, like, the sort of big bad, like, dies maybe 80% way of the movie, and, there's a couple of twists and turns that I liked, and not...
Yeah, and like, especially I think because it's, it is a first feature, but it's also, it's only 90 minutes long. So I think even at the points where it drags, I was, I was like, well, it's so kind of nice to look at in a lot of places that I wasn't too dragged down by it.
Yeah, more I was just I looked at the clock a couple of times and I was like, how has nothing happened yet? Like, a lot of stuff happens in like the last 15 minutes of the movie, which is interesting. But and then I also, I definitely saw a lot of Hellraiser in this. And there's like, it's very interesting because there is an aesthetic overlap, but tonally it's totally different.
Yeah, for sure. And I think and we can get into this later, but I think a through line of Del Toro's work is really that the so-called creature or monster is typically usually like a point of empathy or even like tragedy, and the humans are the real monsters. And I watched an interview where he was talking about this movie in particular, and he was saying basically like making the core like quote unquote monster the saddest figure in the story and the most like empathetic figure in the story. And that the De La Guardias are the actual like monsters, really. But they're, yeah. So, just as far as like visually, I think, one of my questions was going to be, kind of what was some of your favorite like design choices, and like for me, I think one of my favorites was Dieter's bedroom, his like chamber with all of those angel statues in plastic.
Yeah, that's really good.
And that were all like hanging in plastic, and it was all very like blue. And he had like his like, I guess they were like tumors or whatever. He had all this stuff in like jars. And it was I guess in an old factory. I just loved the production design of the whole like De La
Or
Guardia
like a factory that
compound.
was in use, because it was like downstairs. It was like they were still like making or doing something. They were like,
Yeah.
yeah, there were machines that were on, and they were welding.
There was like sparks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw like at one point Ron Perlman's like walking through like an active factory floor.
Yeah, and Ron Perlman's outfits too were very interesting. He had these like sort of.
Oh my god. So, yeah, we can just break into Ron Perlman now, I guess. So, I love him in this. He's so weird. I watched an interview with him as well where he was saying basically like that Guillermo del Toro like sent him the script along with a letter and was like apparently just like knew everything he had been in. He was like, I was a big fan of In the Name of the Rose and like a bunch of other kind of like lesser known things. And that Ron Perlman read the script and he loved it. And then he met with Guillermo del Toro when he was in Los Angeles, and he said basically that they had, quote, a love fest of a dinner, two hedonists who love to eat. And that then he flew down to Mexico when they were going to start shooting. And he was like, okay, who else is in this movie? And he was like, I forget the two, Dieter and Jesus, right. The two actors' names. And he was like, okay, I've never heard of either of these people. What language is this movie in? And Guillermo del Toro was like, oh, Spanish. And he was like, yeah, I don't speak Spanish. And he was like, I know, let's go eat. Just like basically his answer to everything was like, let's go out to dinner. And then basically like he showed up to set and he practiced his Spanish all night. And he was like, how does it sound? And Del Toro was like, oh, garbage. That was absolutely awful, but it's okay. And so then he was like, okay, I'm just going to frame my character as this guy's nephew who's kind of an expat. He came here just to take care of his uncle, who he hates, but he just wants to like inherit his money and get plastic surgery. So he speaks Spanish primarily or like purely as a function of that.
Right.
And so it's sort of like a resentful, like not very good at Spanish.
It works well. It works well.
I was like, yeah. Yeah.
What struck me is, so I love Tom Waits, and in a few different Ron Perlman roles, he's like reminded me of Tom Waits, but he really reminded me of Tom Waits in this. Sort of, they have a sort of similar face. I mean, Ron Perlman's much larger, but they have a similar sort of like look, and Ron Perlman's not quite as gravelly, but they're pretty. I mean, it would be a cool movie them playing brothers. I felt like this character.
Yeah. Well, and Ron Perlman has just one of the most like famously like weird faces. Yeah. And I mean, I know there are plenty of writers and critics who have not used such kind words as weird. Like I've just seen reviews or writings where people literally call him ugly, which is like very cruel. I don't think he's ugly. But he has a great face for heavy makeup, I think. Well,
that was a little joke.
Again, if you're being cruel, Jack. No, but yeah, he's really great in this movie. He gets to bring like a little bit of like humor to the film. And when you mentioned Tom Waits, this did give me a lot of vibes of Bram Stoker's Dracula, even though I think they came out around the same time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, so Bram Stoker's Dracula was 92 and this came out in 93. So I don't know that there was true, this would have already been well into production by the time that came out. But as far as like the, and they're both obviously drawing from source text, but of just the Dracula mythos. And this is not a pure vampire film. Like the word vampire is never used. but it's clearly, he wants blood. There's the immortality aspect. And I did like how this film sort of took the kind of blood lust or the use of the Cronos device and framed it in the visuals of like drug addiction or just addiction in general. Like, especially in the scene where Jesus is on the stairs and he uses the device and then he kind of just like...
Right. And then that like
melts into the staircase.
There's a part of it that like sort of sticks out and goes into your vein, sort of like a needle. Yeah. And in the scenes like in the bathroom sort of reminded me of like a junkie, sort of like he's about to like get on the floor and lick up the blood sort of thing.
Oh, that's like my favorite scene in the whole movie. Yeah. I thought that was just so like beautiful and like twisted.
Yeah. My question, and I think this is also a sort of like a bold move for like a young filmmaker, was so the main character, Jesus, has this mustache for the first maybe half an hour of the movie. And then when he starts sort of de-aging a little bit, which is not like a dramatic thing, just sort of like this sort of subtle thing, he just decides to shave off his mustache, which actually worked on a lot of levels, because then sort of when his wife saw him, she was just like, oh, you look so much younger because you shaved off your mustache.
Yeah. But it almost works into the script in a way that it's like, we believe it because she tells us that. Right. And so, yeah.
Yeah. But like, I can't think of a lot of movies where like the main character has this very prominent facial feature and then changes. It kind of reminded me of Chinatown, where Jack Nicholson's character kind of early on gets like his nose cut, and then he has this bandage over his nose for like the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a cool thing.
Oh, and Ron Perlman has one too at multiple points in this movie, the nose bandage.
Yeah. I thought his whole sort of side arc of nose jobs, and it comes like in a couple of different ways. And then at one point he's listening to this audiobook that is like the philosophy.
He's listening to a like book on tape.
It's like philosophy of plastic surgery.
Yeah, and he's in his little like hidey hole, which kind of looks like a like Cold War bunker or something, like, in that factory.
Harry Pottering it.
And he's on like a little like cot, and he's reading a little fold out about plastic surgery. But yeah, when I was rewatching it, I had completely forgotten about that little side plot. And when he's at the antique store with Jesus and his granddaughter, and he has those little nose like shapes that he keeps holding up, and he's like, "What about this one?" And Jesus doesn't, he's just kind of like, no, yes, that's the one.
And they both pick this like big Roman nose, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, well, and I mean, Ron Perlman already has like, I guess it would be considered quite a large nose. Yeah. But I guess it was just he was looking to have it sculpted in a different way. Anyway, it was very interesting. Just kind of all the choices that they had for his character.
And then my other question was sort of just looking at the very obvious name sort of symbolism. So there's Jesus Gris, which is Jesus Gray. And, he is the character who comes back to life. So that's a sort of very obvious one. But it's very interesting that if he's Jesus, why is Ron Perlman an angel? Like, that's very interesting to me.
Well, yeah. I mean, maybe he's sort of like, Satan was an angel at one point, if you believe in that whole mythos. But, yeah, so I think I know that this was originally... So Del Toro was working on this script for I think something like 9 years or something. It was a very long time. And originally it was titled Vampire of the Grey Dawn. So I don't know if the Grease is some sort of reference to that but he he did mention, Del Toro did mention, like, his history with Catholicism, and how even, like, kind of as a kid, when you would take communion, and it was like the body and blood of Christ, drink of my blood, and, you know, all of those sort of elements of Catholic Mass reminded him so much of the vampire stories that he would read. And so, you know, when he was putting together this film, I mean, so much of that is obviously in the script and in the story. And I mean, I think that's true, you know, well before this movie arrived, but, you know, in the way that he's referencing, you know, Jesus and Angel, and then the statues that hold the Cronos device are of an angel. Yeah, there's just a lot of that.
Yeah, I think they
visual language.
They call it the archangel, but it seems more like a cherub. But you know, it's just me nitpicking, like I do. So speaking of the characters, which were your favorite characters? I think we're kind of already showing our bias.
Yeah, I mean, I do love Ron Perlman, but I do want to give you know, a shout out to Jesus Gris. He's, and I'm gonna quickly look up the actor's name because I would like to actually say his name. So I'll take that from the top. Give me just a second.
Take it from the top.
Yeah, so I would say, you know, Ron Perlman is definitely a favorite, but I also want to give a shout out to Federico Lupi, who played Jesus Gris. He's really great, and he, from the very beginning, you know, plays the character as very kind. He's very good with his granddaughter. You know, even when there's the young man that kind of comes in and is pulling apart the paper to find the statue. I think he's supposed to be sort of reporting back to the De La Guardias. He's still pretty kind to him, and he just seems like a very, like, nice family man. And then even as he sort of falls into the, you know, shenanigans once he uses the Cronos device, you do really sympathize with him, and you still see him as a good person even through all of this. And I think that performance could very easily be, I don't know, like really kind of like big or, I don't want to say camp because I think there are maybe elements, I don't even think there are elements of camp in this. I think he plays it very sincerely, even when, you know, in the latter parts of the film where he's got kind of the outrageous makeup on and everything.
Yeah, it could have been corny.
I think
it could have been a little corny, but he pulls it off in a very sort of authentic sort of.
Yeah, that's what I mean by, like, sincere. Like, I feel like he, you know, he feels like a real person.
Yeah. And
that's why you care about him even, you know, when he looks like a gross monster. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I loved Angel. It just had such a rich, like, sort of lots of little backstory and weird sort of character development. But I think all of the characters were really interesting, and they all had sort of other things going on that I liked. I also liked Jesus's wife, Mercedes, and so she's like a dance teacher, and she's kind of like dancing with one of her prize students or like assistants very suggestively, and is kind of, you know, kind of shitty to Jesus in a couple of scenes. But then once he shaves that mustache and starts getting younger, she's like all about the Jesus, which I found really funny. I like the little girl, Aurora. She was great. Like had very sort of quiet, mischievous looks and stuff. And yeah, I liked everybody except Tito.
I was going to say we haven't talked about Tito, the coroner, yet. He was, I feel like that was like there's some black humor. That was like the scene for some black humor when he's making up Jesus.
Yeah.
I also found it to be a really great device that they worked into the movie, because after that, any of the makeup that is done on him, the special effects makeup, I mean, these are really talented makeup artists, but you don't think like, oh, like that looks weird, because he's been like rouged and had like the weird like gum put on his forehead, and Tito makes him look so outlandish that anything they do after that is going to look better by comparison.
I do love the line from Tito where he's like, after the wake or the funeral or whatever, he's like, they're gonna cremate him, and he starts wiping off some of the makeup, and he's like, we're gonna wipe up all this lipstick. We don't want you going up to heaven looking like you've been with like a puta, if as they say.
I think he said looking like you've been out whoring,
right?
Which is, the parlance that they chose. But yeah, and then I guess like I do want to give like a quick shout out to the actor who plays Dieter de la Guardia, which is Claudio Brook. I think he has a couple of really great scenes, especially the scene when Jesus, after he's come back to life, goes to meet him and kind of confront him. And they have that kind of dialogue, and he talks about insects and how they've been found inside of rock, and like they can survive for 100 years and be brought back to life or whatnot. I think he has some really compelling little soliloquies in there.
Yeah.
And that's at the point also where he peels off, Jesus like peels off parts of his skin.
Right.
And he's got that like ivory white skin underneath, which is very unsettling. His
character, De La Guardia, was very much like straight out of a Clive Barker movie, more than anyone else. Like he is the sort of, guy in search of immortality who finds something he doesn't fully understand. That seemed very, straight out of Hellraiser.
We're already talking about that. I know we can start talking about horror tropes and cliches. This definitely has some parallels to Hellraiser, especially with the clockwork object, which I know you pointed out.
Yeah, and then that it has like some little insect inside that you kind of see sometimes. It shows this little like weird bug that is a very Del Toro-esque sort of but it's a Del Toro-esque sort of mythology that there's like this bug that like drinks your blood and then spits it back out and gives you immortality. But it's also like pulling from Cronenberg and Clive Barker and a bunch of other sort of like real, classic 60s, 70s, 80s horror. And then that he sort of turns into a vampire, but it's sort of the thing that, there's a lot of creatures that sort of crave blood, but then at one point after his like transformation, he gets hit with like some sunlight and like burns, and then you're like, oh, it really is a vampire.
Yeah, and that's kind of like when he does the sort of like Christopher Lee like hands across the face posture when he gets hit with the light. I saw like a full size. The shots that they do of the inside of the Cronos device are really cool, and I saw a photo of the because they built a large size, obviously, to shoot, with the actual like bug in there, because it's all practical.
Right.
And it looked really cool with like the gears and the whole mechanism. Yeah, like that. And then there's the bug inside of there, and then there's also all the bugs in the statue.
Yeah,
all the cockroaches crawl out through the eye.
That was weird because like that just happened that one time, and then sort of like wasn't really explained, or there was no bugs around at any other time. But it was fine. It was creepy.
I feel like it's not one of those. I feel like it's just one of those things that's there for like effect and like to add to like the creepy vibe of the whole thing. This was a movie where I was sort of like, it's kind of told in a way that's supposed to be sort of like magical realism and sort of mythology, even from the opening, which is kind of set in I think the 1500s. So I don't know, I guess there was a lot of things that I was just like, yeah, it's just, I don't know. Yeah. It's part of the magical.
I mean, like
effect.
Like a lot of his work, there is like a childlike wonder to the mythology. It's all sort of like very, I don't want to say childish, but just like sort of innocent in a way.
Well, and he does that. He has, in so many of his films, he has a child character. Right. This Devil's Backbone, Pan's Labyrinth, which we both haven't seen, but I know that, the main kind of, there's a
I've seen a lot of parts of it,
figure. Yeah. And I think, a lot of these stories are, sort of the scary stories you learn of as a child. And I think that perspective is something, I feel like Del Toro has always had sort of there's a certain sort of innocence, I think, to the way that he tells stories, even though they're very non-innocent topics, but he comes to them very honestly and sort of purely. And I don't think that there's much cynicism in any of his stories at all.
No, and it's interesting. I mean, it wasn't in this one, but I think a thing that I took away from The Shape of Water, which is like part of his aesthetic, is like even when he deals with sort of sexuality and romance, it's in a very sort of wholesome way. Like there is a
and he was quoted, or he said in this interview I watched, basically that he was saying, you can't have a sex life without lust, and that the lust of the mind is curiosity.
Ooh,
and that's how he like approaches filmmaking. And then he had a lot of great quotes about kind of just like how much he loves like meals and food, and that he looks at his films as like confections and making sure that the flavors are there even if they don't always rhyme. And I don't know, he had some really great quotes in this, especially just about kind of being like a hedonist in that.
It's very interesting because like not, at least from what I've seen, like not a lot of his movies have sort of food. Well, I guess they do. Never mind. I mean, The Shape of Water has like the candy and and ice cream and some other things, and just maybe this one doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah, and like he talks about just how like fantasy and genre is a way to like indulge in things that I think to society are shameful, but with genre and fantasy you can indulge in those kind of without shame, or kind of like with a license to just purely enjoy it. And that kind of again speaks to sort of that appetite, I suppose. Yeah,
I don't know anything about that. Are you going to do your section, or?
here's the deal, people, and I'm mostly talking to the state of Ohio because you guys are still, one of our biggest download states. Shout out to Ohio.
Cleveland.
Here's the thing. Sometimes it's hard to do 6 degrees. I don't research these. So, this one was hard because I really only know Ron Perlman. I don't know any of the other actors in this. So I was like, I'm not going to force it.
Just be like, Ron Perlman, back to Ron Perlman.
Well, or like back to Guillermo del Toro,
Right.
which I was like, well, then I'll just say this one and then Hellboy and then back. I don't know. So yeah, so we're skipping it this week. And instead I'm gonna put the chips for my 6 degrees onto Jack's pitch of the week so that we can get this thing made.
Let's do it.
What is it?
Yeah, it's actually something I've thought about for a role-playing game at one point. But so basically it's called Children of Chaos. And so it's the little girl from this movie, and it's the little girl from Pan's Labyrinth, and it's a bunch of like children who are like have been possessed or haunted or were just like witnesses to all this crazy shit, but now they're all like teenagers or like in their early 20s, and they all come together and they all have this crazy past, and they do the work, man. They fight monsters and men who would try to be gods. They become the heroes, or maybe the monsters.
Great. So we'll like kind of each week check in with a different kid until they all kind of sync up.
Oh, Avengers it?
Are they all together at the beginning?
Yeah, I think we'll do like more Umbrella Academy-ish, where we'll follow them and sort of like go on little flashbacks when appropriate to the narrative.
Oh, so sort of like Lost, which I'm rewatching right now.
Not familiar. I've never watched Lost. I've watched like
Really?
4 episodes of Lost.
I really love that show, but So, with that being said, let's get down to the horrible idea.
Yeah. La idea horrible is the quest to become something more than human. Will that take away our humanity? Is our mortality the thing that makes us moral beings?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess that sort of feeds into what I was thinking, because in some ways I feel like the immortal person at the core of this, Jesus, has more morality than, either the De La Guardias. And I know that they're on, Dieter's on the quest to become immortal, and so, that's part of what you're saying. But yeah, part of, what I was thinking here is what we said earlier, which is basically that the true monster is man, not the actual, what Jesus becomes. The two De La Guardias, they're capable of violence and murder in some cases. But you never see Jesus kill anybody. And he actually only feeds off of one person.
Well, he kills Angel.
Yeah, I guess he jumps off with him. But that's sort of like it's him or me. He doesn't go killing someone to drink their blood, right. I guess is my point.
He also sacrifices himself to kill Angel, so that's sort of a Catholicism. You didn't say Catholicism.
Well, yeah, that's truly a core concept of this is the Catholicism. I think actually even he said in the script that Jesus is supposed to, it's 3 days after his funeral or his, when he gets pushed off the cliff is when he comes back, which is very heavy-handed. I mean, none of the symbolism in this is a light touch, but that's what kind of makes it more like a myth, a mythical story. Yeah. I mean, and Del Toro has also said like that he has always wanted to make more what he calls lapsed Catholic stories, but really this is the only one that that truly fits that bill.
Yeah, I mean, I think it pops up in Hellboy, but it's also like a lot of other. I haven't seen Pan's Labyrinth, so I can't say, but you know, and a lot of other things, he's working with other people's IP, so that's sort of a little harder to have a big symbolic thing. But yeah, I agree with both of us. I think we're both real smart. Final reactions.
Yeah, so I love Del Toro. I think he's a really great visual stylist and storyteller. I think, you know, his filmography is very up and down. I really like The Shape of Water. We also have not mentioned that he is an Oscar Award winner. Maybe one of the first Oscar Award winners we've discussed.
Well, The Exorcist won.
Trying to think.
Some awards.
Well, but did William Friedkin win? I guess but whatever. Yes. And Silence of the Lambs. He
won for screenplay.
Yeah, that won like everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Silence won, like, swept it. So yeah, I love his work. I love his fascination with monsters. The way he treats them with real like empathy and care and, you know, love and rather than fear. I like that the Jesus Gris character is inherently a good man who really just sort of falls into an addiction, as much as, you know, he is not seeking immortality. It was really just like curiosity and then an addiction. And I think that in the end, he is the one that's able to destroy the device because he is inherently good. And especially because he senses himself kind of about to harm his granddaughter. And so instead of, you know, because he sees her kind of bloody hand, but he kind of forces himself away from it and destroys the Cronos device. And I just love some of the visual touches in this. You know, the color in this film is used really well. There's so much blue and green and white, and red is used so rarely as like so that the blood really stands out. And the scene in the bathroom, that's all black and white. The whole bathroom's black and white, and then there's just like the red droplet on the floor. And I just think that's one of the most twisted and like beautiful images in a vampire-esque movie that I've seen, was just him licking the blood off of the floor in a way that's just so like kind of twistedly erotic almost. I would give it a 2 for scare factor because it's not scary really. I mean, there are some moments with the kind of like the makeup that's a little grisly. But entertainment factor, I'm giving it an 8. I really liked it. I thought there was great humor. I think it's a really confident debut feature. And, you know, we know that he's gone on to do really great work. And also that this was completely produced outside of Hollywood without any sort of, like, studio putting up money. It was all, you know, very independently made. And just clearly great technicians. And a great storyteller. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, similarly, I really enjoyed it. I liked just the mythology and sort of, it was interesting to think of like the Mexican-ness of it, because it was definitely a sort of, I think he's a border cultural person in that he has so much American influence, but he is, you know, of Mexico. And so that sort of came out in it, and it, especially because there were American characters who were canonically American in it. I thought that was cool. And Yeah, just the whole vibe of it was really confident and him. It was like his vision. I've been watching the old Masterclass, and I just did David Lynch, and it was great. Highly recommend it. But a huge thing of his is just like, you have an idea in your minds that you fall in love with, and you can't like give an inch when it comes to that. Like, always have final cut and just like put your vision onto the screen, and that is how you will like succeed in art. And that was like what I was seeing, and it was good. Scare factor, yeah, wasn't real scary. Give it a 1 out of 10. Entertainment factor, I will do like you did and give it an 8 out of 10.
Yeah. Just quick from what you were saying, on the like kind of stick to your vision thing, that's one of the things that Ron Perlman said he just loved about making this film, is that he had worked in Hollywood for a long time, and that working on this production, he was like, just no one told these guys no.
Right.
Like, they just made what they wanted to make, and that was like what was wonderful about this indie film. And he counts it as kind of like a turning point in his career and his life, was working on this movie with Del Toro. I mean, because they went on to work on so many things, but also just like the freedom of that production, and that nobody was saying no or you can't.
Yeah, it also reminded me. Sorry.
Nope.
It also reminded me, and this is a weird pull, but I think I'm not the first to sort of say it, but the lapsed Catholic and the sort of like die-hard do-it-yourself aesthetic reminds me a lot of Kevin Smith, and there's sort of like some other mirrors in sort of their aesthetic and philosophy, like,
yeah, they're just working in like different genres, really.
Right.
Although I know Kevin Smith has done some horror type stuff, but yeah.
Yeah, and then Dogma was certainly like confronting Catholicism in a more direct way, but I'm somewhat of a Kevin Smith apologist, but that's...
Oh, and then just real quick also, before I forget, one of my favorite things in this interview was Del Toro said that he wrote the character, especially of Angel, to be kind of a stereotypical American, kind of like obsessed with plastic surgery and all these things, because he said in Hollywood so many Mexican characters are written really broadly and stereotypical.
Right.
He was like, so I'm gonna write the American as kind of a boorish
yeah
guy obsessed with plastic surgery, which I thought was awesome. But,
very.
So what are we talking about next week, Jack?
Next week, please join us, where we will go into the culture of my people. Dario Argento's 1970 debut, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, which is considered one of the best giallo films, or the sort of Italian 70s and 80s horror subgenre. Review us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever you're listening to this. Don't be scared. It's going to be okay. Just let the scarab do its work.
Yeah. And if you have any interesting facts about The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, or Dario Argento, or Giallo, or if you have a suggestion for a movie that might scare us, or make us laugh, or especially during this month of Pride, something created by a LGBTQ creator, or with a gay storyline that isn't shamey, hit us up. Let us know on Twitter, or email us at thehorribleidea@gmail.com.
Ciao. Arrivederci.
Ciao, bella.
Arrivederci, bravo.
Hasta la vista, baby.
Different language.
Well, this was Spanish, so, I was just bridging the gap. Also, hasta la vista is, like, not something that most Spanish speakers say.